Welcome to the 2022 St. Louis Literary Award Ceremony at Sheldon Hall, honoring Arundhati Roy. This event is proudly presented by St. Louis University and HEC Media.
I'm coming out like 7 more times, so if you could do that each time, it'll be great for my ego. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ted Iber, and I am being blocked here. Let me see this. Okay, I'm the executive director for the St. Louis Literary Award, and we are live from the Sheldon Concert Hall in St. Louis, Missouri. So I want to welcome our in-person audience here at this gorgeous venue, as well as our online viewers from really all around the world. So I promise not to insult anyone's significant other because I don't want to get slapped. So no rushing the stage. If you're watching on a screen, no rushing the screen. Just stay where you are. We are all about celebrating writing and literature and certainly not bringing anyone down. I'm going to be your MC tonight for this, the 55th Annual St. Louis Literary Award Program brought to you by St. Louis University. And I'll be out here to introduce our performers and speakers before they take the stage. You will probably be a bit sick of my voice by around 7:30 or so, but I'm also thinking of my kids always reminding me no dad jokes during the evening, but unfortunately, too late. So it has been a year now since last April when we had this is actually number 3 in the course of 1 year. 3 literary award celebrations. So last April, with Michael Chabon in an online program moderated by actor Jon Hamm, and I'm going to add that that our 2019 Literary Award recipient, Edwidge Danticat, reminded me in a text message last year. She said, "Hey, you got the pandemic Michael. That's so cool." If you watched it, you saw that he'd grown his hair out, his beard, all was very big. And I do want to remind you that you can catch all of those literary award programs since 2017 when we had Margaret Atwood here. Those are on the University Library's website, so please check those out. We celebrated the 2021 Literary Award Program right here on the stage this past November, featuring the wonderful British writer Zadie Smith. And right now, of course, we are here tonight honoring the 2022 St. Louis Literary Award recipient, Arundhati Roy. So we now have 11 programs that fall under the umbrella of the St. Louis Literary Award series of programs, ranging from the SLU Campus Read, the Literature and Medicine Book Discussion Group, Evenings from Home, the Inspired by Art Showcase for high school and college students, and the Undergraduate Writing Award, just to name some of them. It takes a team effort in various departments from around both the SLU, St. Louis, and Madrid campuses. So I want to take a few moments to single out some of that team before we kick off our show. But first, I do want to thank specifically Arundhati and her fabulous agent, Anthony Arnove, sorry Anthony, I know you're not married, for taking on so many program requests and interviews while they've been here in town. We had to make a slight detour last night to IKEA because we were searching for something specific. And it became clear to Arundhati that I had no idea where I was going. And that actually, no one works there. And if you've been there, you know what I mean. So she said, "You're lost, aren't you?" And she wasn't being accusatory or anything, just a matter of fact. And I said, "I'm completely lost." So we learned that we are kindred spirits and that we were both born without a sense of direction. And that's not a metaphor, that's at all. So thanks, Target, for having what we needed. Thank you to the Literary Award selection team for the huge number of hours they put into doing the research and the reading into our list of writers. Remember, you've got the 2024 card of recommendations in front of you, so fill that out. Thanks to the Campus Read Committee, made up of faculty and staff from more than 20 departments from both St. Louis and Madrid. This year, for the first time, we had 2 Campus Read books, Arundhati Roy's seminal novel, The God of Small Things, and the stark, intensely revealing nonfiction work, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. Thank you to Dr. Fran Pistello in Sociology and the President's Circle for being such an integral driver of all of our programming. Donna Neely, our indispensable administrative assistant for the university libraries. Yes, absolutely. Donna, I know you will get me back for that. Annalise Piven and Claire Herman from Development and Alumni Relations, who are also running the show backstage tonight. PhD candidate from our fabulous School of Education, Tara Ernst. Bella Cayley, graduating senior in English with a minor in Women and Gender Studies. Maria Horing, graduating senior in Integrated Strategic Communications and Environmental Sciences. Our Dean of St. Louis University Libraries, Dave Cassens, who helps make all of this possible under his leadership. Dave's retiring later this summer and certainly has my enormous gratitude for everything that he has done for all of these programs. Finally, our sincere thanks to the Edward H. and Rosemary Young Fund of the St. Louis Community Foundation for their generous support, and to our other outstanding sponsors, Left Bank Books, out in the hall tonight, and Caldy's Coffee Roasting Company. So, let's get rolling. Sebastian Boots is a solo chamber and orchestral percussionist based in St. Louis, Missouri. In addition to performing and teaching Western classical percussion, Sebastian specializes in North Indian tabla drumming. His doctoral dissertation analyzes the form and structure of a traditional tabla solo in North Indian musical lineage known as Benares Gharana. As part of his research, Sebastian spent 6 months in Varanasi, India, where he studied tabla with Pandit Kishore Kumar Mishra. He currently teaches percussion at Lindenwood University, and he's appeared as a recitalist and clinician throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. Let me tell you, as a drummer and percussionist, these are the hardest drums on the planet to play. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sebastian Boots. Thanks, Sebastian. That was exceptional. It's my honor to introduce the president of St. Louis University, Dr. Fred Pustello. Dr. Pustello became the university's 33rd president in July of 2014. He's the first permanent lay president in St. Louis University's 204-year history. Under his leadership, the university has come together as a community to develop a campus-wide strategic plan and a vision for our future. At the heart of this plan is the success of our students and the health of our patients, rooted in the SLU Jesuit mission and values. The university has increased investment in faculty, scholarship, research, and facilities, reaching new heights of academic excellence and patient outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Fred Pustello.
Thank you. I'm going to thank a number of people, but before he gets away and before I welcome you, and while he's out here, I want to thank Ted Iber. This man works so hard for this event. We are so fortunate to have him in our community and with our university. Ted, for all you do to make this possible and so much more. So good evening and welcome to the 2022 St. Louis Literary Award event. I want to thank you for having me. It is an honor to be here with all of you. Each year, for more than half a century, the St. Louis Literary Award has been bestowed upon a distinguished writer. The writer selected joins us to share their work and share their craft with our community. During this always memorable event, we celebrate a literary voice and the role that literature plays in our lives. This evening, we have the honor of welcoming award-winning writer Arundhati Roy. The St. Louis Literary Award is a gift to the university and a gift to our community. Year after year, the Literary Award Committee brings an outstanding individual to St. Louis, a person who deepens our insight into the human condition and who expands the scope of our compassion. And as you know, these events are free and open to the public. These gatherings enrich our culture and community in St. Louis. I want to thank everyone who helped make this possible. Thank you, David Cassins and Donna Neely from the libraries. I'm also grateful to Ted Iber for all he has done to nurture and continue the growth of the Literary Award. and related programming. Thank you to the St. Louis Literary Awards Selection Committee for selecting and honoring the work of such a spectacular writer, and to the Campus Read Committee for engaging the university community in conversations about writing and literature throughout the academic year. And all of you who have played a role in organizing and promoting tonight's events, especially Annalise Priven and Claire Herman from Alumni Relations and Development, as well as the student graphic design team, the Tidy Projects Design, and their faculty advisor, Martin Brief. Past Library Associate Board members, thank you. Thank you for your contributions to the program over the years. You've helped it to be one of the most successful and longest-running literary award programs in the country. And thank you again to our sponsors. It is because of you that we can keep these events running and free and open to the public. Finally, thank each of you who are here tonight. You play a critical role in making the annual Literary Award event the stimulating evening it always promises to be. We are honored to be here to celebrate tonight's author and her award-winning work with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pistello. Now I'd like to introduce St. Louis University Samanvita Kasturi. Samanvita is a sophomore at St. Louis U, majoring in psychology and minoring in dance and American studies. She's been learning Bharatanatyam, okay, there we go, and Kathak, two Indian classical dance styles, for the past 14 years under Guru Prasanna Kasturi. She finished her, oh my gosh, with the words, I'm really trying, Arutigatram, oh, I'm so sorry, and or debut performance with a live orchestra when she was 14 and 15. Samanvita has received many awards and performed in many places, such as winning second place at the Fox Teen Talent Competition and performing at the Governor's Mansion. She's choreographed for many projects, including a dance for Indian Raga, which is a huge platform dedicated to promoting Indian art forms. Tonight, Samanvita will be performing a piece called Tratagna, which means ungrateful. This piece is centered around environmentalism and tells the story of Mother Earth raising mankind, only for mankind to turn its back on her and take advantage of her care. This piece was choreographed and composed by Samanvita and features quotes from Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. Please welcome Samanvita Kasturi.
powers fear powerlessness, man's subliminal urge to destroy what he could neither subdue nor deify. It had taken the whole of Earthwoman's life for the earth to become what it was, for the oceans to part, for the mountains to rise. It is, after all, so easy to shatter a story, to break a chain of thought, to ruin a fragment of a dream being carried around carefully like a piece of porcelain.
జన్ను తక్క జన్ను తీత జన్ను తక్క జన్ను తక్క జన్ను తక్క జన్ను తదిమి తజన్మి తదిమి తజన్ను తక తరిగడ తక తై తాత తి 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 తుం 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 నం 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 దిగు తరిగడ తక తాత తి 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 తుం 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 నం 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 దిగు తరి తై తాత తి తక తుం తక నం తక తాత తి తక నం తరిగడ తక తాత తి తక తుం తక నం తక తాత తి తక నం తరిగడ తక త తీత జన్ను తరిగడ తక తీత జన్ను తరిగడ తక త జన్ను తరిగడ తక త దిత్త తరిగడ తుం తాంగ్ త దిత్త తరిగడ తుం తాంగ్ త దిత్త తరిగడ తుం తా.
We were watching back there on computer screens and just mesmerized. That was astoundingly good. I'm truly having a hard time talking right now. Okay, tonight we are honored to have St. Louis University English Chair Dr. Toby Bennis take a few minutes to present the annual Walter J. Ong von Kaenow Memorial Award for Excellence in Graduate Research. Dr. Bennis.
Thank you. The St. Louis University Literary Award celebrates great writers and the richness of literature. The Department of English is St. Louis University's custodian of the study of our diverse and vibrant literary heritage. Each year, we have the honor of announcing the winner of our departmental prize for excellence in graduate student research in conjunction with the Literary Awards ceremony. The English department has been the professional home to some of the best scholar teachers in the discipline. Perhaps the most illustrious of these was Walter J. Ong, a brilliant Jesuit scholar who taught for many years in our program. Accordingly, our departmental award for graduate student excellence is named in honor of Father Ong, as well as for the von Kaenow family, whose generosity underwrites this prize. Tonight, I'm delighted to announce that the winner of this year's Walter J. Ong von Kaenow Award is Laura Hardin Marshall. Laura is an exceptionally promising English graduate student nearing the end of her doctoral program. As an emerging scholar, Laura specializes in the fields of rhetoric and composition. Her dissertation is a pioneering study of the vital work performed in American university writing centers. As any college student facing a term paper can tell you, university writing services provide vital, individualized guidance in writing instruction through one-on-one discussions with trained consultants. Laura's dissertation breaks new ground in establishing a quantitative, data-driven methodology to evaluate how students actually use instructor feedback on their writing. This work will enable profession-wide best practices for university writing centers, whose formative role in student learning is now widely recognized in higher education. Laura's scholarship brings the storied Jesuit tradition of eloquentia perfecta, or perfect eloquence, into the 21st century. Laura has already published 3 articles in leading journals and presented at professional conferences across the U.S. She has a growing list of honors to her credit. Perhaps most notable is her admission to the highly competitive Dartmouth College Institute for Writing and Rhetoric, a program designed to support emerging scholar teachers using empirical methods. Please join me in congratulating the winner of the 2021 Walter J. Ong S.J. Von Cano Award, Laura Hardin Marshall.
See, I told you I was going to be on and off a lot. Dr. Amber Johnson is the moderator for tonight's discussion with Arundhati Roy, and I'd like to take a minute to tell you about Dr. Johnson before I introduce our guest of honor this evening. As a scholar, artist, activist, Dr. Johnson, or Dr. J, explores the language, exigency, sound, and the aesthetics of social justice. Their art, research, and activism focuses on performances of identity, protest, and social justice in digital and lived spaces. Dr. J is the founding director of the Justice Fleet, a mobile justice museum that fosters healing through art, dialogue, and play, interim vice president of the Division for Diversity and Innovative Community Engagement, and an award-winning professor of communication and social justice at St. Louis University. Their forthcoming book, A Great Inheritance, is a young adult fiction novel and memoir that follows 5 children charged with dismantling gender binary and eventually the genetic economy. Dr. J wrote the manuscript to help people better support and love gender fluid and trans people. Right now, you can see Dr. J you can see how Dr. J turns data into visual art in their title, Transfuturism, in our excellent St. Louis University Art Museum. This exhibit, which is a collaboration between Dr. J and Ripley Marie Bennett, a Black trans woman illustrator, houses 25 oil and acrylic paintings on canvas that feature Black trans and non-binary people from around the globe who use their physical bodies to seek, perform, create, and express liberation formations. The show is on exhibit until June 5th. So Dr. Johnson will join us on stage with Arundhati in just a few minutes. So now, Arundhati Roy. So eloquently stated by my colleague, Associate Dean of Libraries, Patrick McCarthy. From historians to poets to novelists to playwrights to creative nonfiction writers and more, the consistent thread of all of our St. Louis Literary Award recipients share is that of humane values and critically looking at the world that we're part of and trying to make sense of all of it through their writing. Arundhati Roy is an exceptional writer. She wouldn't be in town right now to accept the St. Louis Literary Award and joining the ranks of recipients like Joan Didion and Margaret Atwood, August Wilson, Salman Rushdie, Zadie Smith, Tennessee Williams, and Stephen Sondheim if that wasn't the case. She won the Booker Prize for her first novel, The God of Small Things, in 1997. She was honored with the Norman Mailer Prize for Distinguished Writing in 2011, the Sydney Peace Prize in 2004, India's National Film Award for Best Screenplay in 1989, the Lannan Foundation Cultural Freedom Award in 2003. She was awarded special recognition as a Woman of Peace at the Global Exchange Human Rights Awards and was named on Time Magazine 100 list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Arundhati Roy has been a consistent and a steady voice of compassion who speaks and writes truth to power, providing a consistent counterbalance to those in the seats of influence and control who suppress democratic ideals and limit basic human rights. Her nonfiction and fiction highlight how our lives around the planet are inextricably intertwined. She's been labeled an intellectual terrorist by the Indian government for espousing views that are completely aligned with democratic ideals, with what democratic ideals are supposed to represent. The basic pursuit of free will, the right to pursue one's passion, whether that's a job, education, the freedom of artistic expression, to choose a path of happiness and love for all people, LGBTQA, unimpeded by authoritarian politicians, repressive laws, and acts of violence designed to both intimidate and oppress individuals or groups who have opposing views. Arundhati Roy is a shining star on our planet, not only because she's brilliant, unique, and provocative as a writer of nonfiction and fictional prose, whose sentences often sound like they're written by a poet with their evocative, visceral, and often lyrical imagery. It is indeed for her body of written work that so closely aligns with the St. Louis Literary Award mission statement that she's the recipient of this year's award, part of which I'm going to highlight again. The St. Louis Literary Award recognizes a living writer with a substantial body of work that's enriched our literary heritage by deepening our insight into the human condition and by expanding our scope of compassion. Yes, that's Arundhati Roy. When deciding on which of her books we would use for the Campus Read this year, a program that is open not only to students, faculty, and staff of St. Louis University, but the entire community outside of our campus too, we really struggled. Her novels, The God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, have garnered many awards and massive critical acclaim for a reason. They're astoundingly well-written and engrossing books. However, Ms. Roy has also written an enormous volume of essays and nonfiction books that can collectively be used as primers on humanitarianism in all of its forms, economic and social justice, religious and ethnic tolerance, and much more. When Zadie Smith, our 2021 Literary Award recipient, was leaving campus for the final time this fall, she and I were walking just outside of the Chaffetz School of Business, and she chucked me on the arm, and she said, "Ted, I just want to say this about Arundhati. I'm in awe of her. She's truly one of the most important writers, one of the most important people in the world today." And in my memory of that quote, she said, "So don't screw it up." And I swear, I can't remember if she actually said it, if I just, like, that's my imposter syndrome memory or something, but I got the message. I urge everyone who is watching this to read Arundhati's work, to listen to her interviews online, and follow her lead on standing up to people and governments who abuse their power, those who facilitate injustice. Part of the mission of St. Louis University is to be in the service of humanity and to welcome students, faculty, and staff from all racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds and beliefs, and create a sense of community that facilitates their development as men and women for others. Not a bad mission statement for our entire planet, is what I think. And certainly these words and ideals come shining through in the work of Arundhati Roy. So with that, please join me in welcoming Arundhati Roy as our 2022 Literary Award recipient. I'm not going to make you hold this. I'm going to put this over here. Okay, so far so good. Neither of us have dropped it. Okay, I'm going to move my stuff.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you everybody who spoke before him and the performers. It was so touching and beautiful. I'm so proud to receive this prize, not just because it's an honor to be in that list of truly the greatest writers in the world over the years, but also because I see and have watched as we corresponded about this prize that it wasn't just about giving some big writer a prize and getting them to come here, but such a wonderful effort to teach their work, to share it with students, to a commitment to literature which is rare, because otherwise so often prizes are just about the razzle-dazzle and, getting people to come and do interviews. But I really appreciate how much the love of literature was part of this award and its tradition. So thank you so much for that. We're going to do plenty of talking afterwards, Amber and I. and you, I hope. So I thought I would just do 2 readings from The God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, so that, because I write better than I speak, so I thought, so both the readings will be from the, from the first chapter of each book. From the dining room window where she stood, with the wind in her hair, Rahel could see the rain drum down on the rusted tin roof of what used to be their grandmother's pickle factory, Paradise Pickles and Preserves. It lay between the house and the river. They used to make pickles, squashes, jams, curry powder, and canned pineapples, and banana jam illegally after the Food Products Organization banned it, because according to their specifications, it was neither jam nor jelly. Too thin for jelly and too thick for jam, an ambiguous, unclassifiable consistency, they said, as per their books. Looking back now, to Rahel it seemed as though this difficulty that their family had with classification ran much deeper than the jam-jelly question. Perhaps Ammu, Esther, and she were the worst transgressors, but it wasn't just them, it was the others too. They all broke the rules. They all crossed into forbidden territory. They all tampered with the laws that lay down who should be loved and how much. The laws that make grandmothers grandmothers, uncles uncles, mothers mothers, cousins cousins, jam jam, and jelly jelly. It was a time when uncles became fathers, mothers lovers, and cousins died and had funerals. It was a time when the unthinkable became thinkable and the impossible really happened. Even before Sophie Moore's funeral, the police found Velita. His arms had goosebumps where the handcuffs touched his skin, cold hands with a sour metal smell, like steel bus rails and the smell of the bus conductor's hands from holding them. After it was all over, baby Kochma said, "As he sows, so shall he reap," as though she had had nothing to do with the sowing and the reaping. She returned on her small feet to her cross-stitch embroidery. Her little toes never touched the floor. It was her idea that Esther be returned. Margaret Kochma's grief and bitterness at her daughter's death coiled inside her like an angry spring. She said nothing but slapped Esther whenever she could in the days she was there before she returned to England. Rahel watched Ammu pack Esther's little trunk. "Maybe they're right," Ammu whispered. "Maybe a boy does need a baba." And Rahel saw that her eyes were redly dead. They consulted a twin expert in Hyderabad. She wrote back to say that it wasn't advisable to separate monozygotic twins, but that 2-egg twins were no different from ordinary siblings. And while they would certainly suffer the natural distress that children from broken homes underwent, it would be nothing more than that, nothing out of the ordinary. And so Esther was returned in a train with his tin trunk and his beige and pointy shoes rolled into his khaki hold-all, first class overnight, on the Madras mail to Madras, and then with a friend of their father's from Madras to Calcutta. He had a tiffin carrier with tomato sandwiches and an eagle flask with an eagle. He had terrible pictures in his head: rain, rushing, inky water, and a smell, sick, sweet, like old roses on a breeze. But worst of all, he carried inside him the memory of a young man with an old man's mouth, the memory of a swollen face and a smashed, upside-down smile, of a spreading pool of clear liquid with a bare bulb reflected in it, of a bloodshot eye that had opened, wandered, and then fixed its gaze on him, Esther. And what had Esther done? He had looked into that beloved face and said, yes, yes, it was him. In a purely practical sense, it would probably be correct to say that it all began when Sophie Moll came to Imanum. Perhaps it's true that things can change in a day, that a few dozen hours can affect the outcome of whole lifetimes, and that when they do, those few dozen hours, like the salvaged remains of a burned house, the charred clock, the singed photograph, the scorched furniture, must be resurrected from the ruins and examined, preserved, accounted for. Little events, ordinary things, smashed and reconstituted, imbued with new meaning. Suddenly they become the bleached bones of a story. Still, to say that it all began when Sophie Mole came to Imanum is only one way of looking at it. Equally, it could be argued that it actually began thousands of years ago, long before the Marxists came, before the British took Malabar, before the Dutch ascendancy, before Vasco da Gama arrived, before the Zamorin's conquest of Calicut, before 3 purple-robed Syrian bishops murdered by the Portuguese were found floating in the sea with coiled sea serpents riding on their chests and oysters knotted in their tangled beards. It could be argued that it began long before Christianity arrived in a boat and seeped into Kerala like tea from a tea bag. That it really began in the days when the love laws were made, the laws that lay down who should be loved and how much. So this is the first chapter of the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. It's called Where Do Old Birds Go to Die? She lived in a graveyard like a tree. At dawn, she saw the crows off and welcomed the bats home. At dusk, she did the opposite. Between shifts, she conferred with the ghosts of vultures that loomed in her high branches. She felt the gentle grip of their talons, like an ache in an amputated limb. She gathered they weren't altogether unhappy at having excused themselves and exited from the story. When she first moved in, she endured months of casual cruelty like a tree would, without flinching. She didn't turn to see which small boy had thrown a stone at her, didn't crane her neck to read the insults scratched into her bark. When people called her names, clown without a circus, queen without a palace, she let the hurt blow through her branches like a breeze and used the music of her rustling leaves as balm to ease the pain. It was only after Ziauddin, the blind imam who had once led the prayers in Fatehpuri Masjid, befriended her and began to visit her, that the neighborhood decided it was time to leave her in peace. Long ago, a man who knew English told her that her name, written backwards in English, spelt Majnu. In the English version of the story of Layla and Majnu, he said, Majnu was called Romeo and Layla was Juliet. She found that hilarious. You mean I've made a khichdi of their story, she asked. What will they do when they find that Layla may actually be Majnu and Romy was really Julie? The next time he saw her, the man who knew English said he'd made a mistake. Her name, spelled backwards, would be Mujna, which wasn't a name and meant nothing at all. To this she said, it doesn't matter, I'm all of them. I'm Romy and Julie, I'm Layla and Majnu and Mujna. Why not? Who says my name is Anjum? I'm not Anjum, I'm Anjuman. I'm a mehfil, a gathering of everybody and nobody, of everything and nothing. Is there anyone else you'd like to invite? Everyone's invited. The man who knew English said it was clever of her to come up with that one. He said he'd never have thought of it himself. She said, how could you have with your standard of Urdu? What do you think? English makes you clever automatically? He laughed, she laughed at his laugh, and they shared a filter cigarette. He complained that Will's navy-cut cigarettes were short and stumpy and still simply not worth the price. She said she preferred them any day to Foursquare or the very manly red and white. She didn't remember his name now. Perhaps she never knew it. He was long gone, the man who knew English, to wherever he had to go, and she was living in the graveyard behind the government hospital. For company, she had her steel Godrej Almira in which she kept her music, scratched rep cords and tapes, an old harmonium, her clothes, jewelry, her father's poetry books, her photo albums, and a few press clippings that had survived the fire at the Khwabgah. She hung the key around her neck on a black thread, along with her bent silver toothpick. She slept on a threadbare Persian carpet that she locked up in the day and unrolled between two graves at night, as a private joke, never the same two on consecutive nights. She still smoked, still navy cut. One morning while she read the newspaper aloud to him, the old imam, who clearly hadn't been listening, asked, affecting a casual air, "Is it true that even the Hindus among you are buried, not cremated?" Sensing trouble, she prevaricated. "True? Is what true? What is truth?" Unwilling to be deflected from his line of inquiry, the imam muttered a mechanical response, "Sach khuda hai, khuda hi sach hai." Truth is God, God is truth, the sort of wisdom that was available on the backs of the painted trucks that roared down the highways. Then he narrowed his blind green eyes and asked in a sly green whisper, "Tell me, you people, when you die, where do they bury you? Who bathes the bodies? Who says the prayers?" Anjum said nothing for a long time. Then she leaned across and whispered back, untree-like, "Imam Sahib, when people speak of color, red, blue, orange, when they describe the sky at sunset or moonrise during Ramzan, what goes through your mind?" Having wounded each other thus deeply, almost mortally, the two sat quietly side by side on someone's sunny grave, hemorrhaging. Eventually, it was Anjum who broke the silence. "You tell me," she said, "you're the Imam Sahib, not me. Where do old birds go to die? Do they fall on us like stones from the sky? Do we stumble on their bodies in the streets? Do you not think that the all-seeing, almighty one who put us on this earth has made proper arrangements to take us away?" That day, the Imam's visit ended earlier than usual. Anjum watched him leave, tap, tap, tapping his way through the graves, his seeing eye cane making music as it encountered the empty booze bottles and discarded syringes that littered his path. She didn't stop him. She knew he'd be back. No matter how elaborate its charade, she recognized loneliness when she saw it. She sensed that in some strange, tangential way, he needed her shade as much as she needed his. And she had learned from experience that need was a warehouse that could accommodate a considerable amount of cruelty. Even though Anjum's departure from the Khwabgah had been far from cordial, she knew that its dreams and its secrets were not hers alone to betray. Thank you.
All right, is this thing on? Oh, I can hear myself. Hi, everyone. I want to begin by just saying thank you. Thank you for sharing your gifts and using your talent to change our world. If truth-telling makes one an intellectual terrorist, may we all be intellectual terrorists. Another hand, please. So we'll start with a personal question. You studied architecture at the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi before you became a writer. And as a writer, you liken novels to cities, and you approach the structure of a novel as though it were an architectural piece. Can you share what drew you to architecture in the first place?
Well, yes, there were profound things and superficial things. I grew up initially in the village where the God of Small Things is set, and then in the town close by where my mother runs a school still. And it's a very closed and very parochial community. And my mother actually had married somebody outside the community and then divorced. And so my brother and I were, constantly reminded brutally sometimes that we were never going to be accepted by them. And so from the time I was very young, I knew that I had to find my way out of there, and I knew that I had to start earning my living very, very quickly. So and then my mother's school, which started out in a small, rented room, basically expanded, and a very brilliant architect came, and he said he practiced what he calls no-cost architecture. Not low cost, but no cost, very beautiful. It showed me how a beautiful architecture doesn't have necessarily anything to do with money, And so I thought, now if I can, and I knew some people I had met some people who had studied in the School of Architecture. It was a very sort of small, ratty, but legendary place. And I just thought, even, if by the time I'm first year, second year, you can start working in people's offices, you can start being a draftsperson, you can, and in those days, literally that education was free almost, except for the, food bills or whatever. So I went there and was so deeply engrossed in the study of architecture, although by the time I was in third year, I knew that I didn't want to be an architect, building, houses for rich people, but it taught me something else about cities and design and structure.
Okay, so saying what you just said, right, your third year, we're like, no more. So in 2018, you did an interview with The Guardian, and they asked if you could choose your profession all over again, would you choose architecture? And I think you said yes. So if you could go back to that moment when you chose to study architecture, but you knew then what you know now about how social media would completely change humanity, would you change your trajectory?
Well, no, because I never, I never ever look at myself or my life in terms of a profession, because I find I'm incapable of doing that, actually. So for me, architecture was never going to be a profession. It was either a way of earning a basic living while I did what I found and loved to do. But also, everything is just, even writing, I don't approach my writing as something that I just have to do, every 2 months or every 2 years I have to produce a book. I can't do that. For me, it's more something that I do because I cannot do anything else. Sometimes it's almost as if it controls me, not that I control it. So what is the way of trying to express what you need to say or communicate what you need to communicate? Is it cinema? Is it architecture? Is it writing? Is it speaking? Is it, accepting some prizes and rejecting others? And, yeah.
Lots of people have writing sanctuaries, so places they go where they write and get meaningful work done. What does your writing space look like?
Well, again, I have, obviously my home it's a flat in Delhi, and I managed to, it's what I call a royalty apartment, bought all the royalties of the books I've written, and I managed to, get it when it hadn't yet been completely built, and so the building was hideous. So every day I would go to the architect and kind of beg and cajole him to remove one hideous feature, So I managed to strip down the exterior to just, something non-hideous, but nothing amazing. But inside, I managed to design my own place, but it's very open. And one of the things that I love about living in India is that you can't really close yourself off from anything, So there are animals that come and go, there are, birds and dogs, and during the lockdown, a stray dog just came and produced 7 puppies just outside my door, So it's a bit like the Jannat guest house in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, All kinds of people and things come and go, and I'm not a person who needs, in fact, I think I'd be really, often people invite me to these writers' retreats in sort of beautiful places, and it scares the hell out of me. Like, I'm just like, no, I write in chaos, Yeah.
So then do you have a ritual or a way to prepare to sit down and write?
Some very serious professor of literature in Cambridge asked me that, and I said the only ritual that I have is every morning I wake up and bite my dogs. But, yeah. But when I'm writing, actually, jokes aside, I do bite my dogs, but there's a very different rhythm in my body when I'm writing fiction and when I'm writing nonfiction, because the nonfiction comes from a place of anger and unease, and I'm sensing a kind of bullying consensus building on the most shameful Indian television, mainstream media channels, and then you write to blow that open. But fiction, I'm just absolute, as everyone knows, no hurry. It could take 20 years between books, So, but I am actually a very disciplined writer when I'm working, especially when I'm working on fiction. Nonfiction, I just can't sleep. I just pace around.
Wonderful. You published your second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, in 2016. In previous interviews, you said that you might have abandoned that project before finishing had it not been for the feedback you received from fellow writer John Berger. After reading your draft, he said, "Go back to Delhi and don't do anything except write that book." Do you often seek out feedback on your writing before it goes to publication?
Never. Actually, it's not that I had no intention of abandoning it, but John Berger, I don't know how many of you are familiar with his work, but he was somehow the most, just personally as well as his work, was so precious to me. And I'm pretty I don't discuss, especially about fiction, with anybody when I'm writing it, because it's so, it's a sort of alchemy that just would get up and go away. But John Berger, who's not alive now, he had that sort of relationship with me. He used to call me Utmost, actually, and he said, just sit down and I know, I can tell from your face and your body that you're writing something, read it to me. And so I just, read him a part of the ministry, and he said, you've got to go back to Delhi and you've got to promise me that you're not going to do anything else but finish this book. And I said, I swear I will not. And I went back to Delhi, and within weeks, a note was pushed under my door, and this was from, the guerrilla war that was going on in the jungles of central India. And it said, it was inviting me to go and walk with the comrades, spend 3 weeks in the forest where basically there's an armed conflict, but the lands of indigenous people are being signed away to mega corporations. And now, how was I not going to accept that invitation? Of course I did, and of course I went, and then I wrote a long essay or a short book called Walking with the Comrades, and of course that led to more charges of intellectual terrorism and so on, and a whole new set of things that one had to deal with. But then, as you know, it becomes also a part of the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, an experience that I would never have had otherwise, and which I value and cherish greatly. Walking and living in the forest, 40% of the armed guerrillas are women, and there were moments when, the government had vigilante armies burning down villages, raping women, and these young women had fought and had told me the most unbelievable stories. And there was a point at which we were all bathing in the river. There were armed Maoist guerrillas, there was me, the writer, there were farmer women, and I just thought, look at this river, and look at all the women in it, how amazing.
Earlier you mentioned writing from a place of anger, a place of rage. In 2019, you published a collection of nonfiction essays titled My Seditious Heart. It was reviewed in an article from The New Yorker that's called The Prescient Anger of Arundhati Roy. And it said one of the essays was written in the key of rage, and that your anger is the most indispensable part of your writing. How do you react to people talking about the valid anger expressed in your nonfiction writing, and what role does rage play in changing systems and seeking truth and justice?
Well, when the thing is that when The God of Small Things came out in 1997 and won the Booker Prize, it was India was at a cusp, and basically when the book came out, I was on the cover of every magazine as this, Indian who had taken the place, put India on the cultural high table, and I was celebrated as such. And then the right-wing government came to power, the Hindu right, and within months it conducted a series of nuclear tests, and there was this outpouring even from artists and writers of rabid nationalism, And I was in a place where I was being celebrated as one of the items of national pride, and keeping quiet would have meant acquiescing with that, So I wrote the first political essay, which was called The End of Imagination. And I said, if it's anti-Indian and anti-Hindu to have this nuclear bomb implanted in our imagination, then I secede. And it just created so much anger. But the thing is that often, women, especially a woman, obviously we are continuously being accused of being angry or hysterical, or shrilly being accused of being shrill, hysterically being accused of being hysterical. And I think, and the kind of juxtaposition between, as if they are oppositional things, passion and rage and reason. And I'm like, yeah, I'm angry for these reasons. It's not that I'm just angry, and I'm shouting from the rooftops, yes, because I'm not going to whisper this to my grandmother, And of course I'm hysterical, you should be, look at what's happening. So there was a constant requirement, particularly from upper caste men, asking you to calm down, to be moderate, to be reasonable, to, They would even give me lists of what kinds of things I could write about and what I couldn't write about. And I was like, okay, do you want to, prescribe my wardrobe and, tell me what color I should wear on what day? Yeah.
You talked about imagination. Imagination is a huge component of my work, and even now on campus, anytime somebody uses a word, they say borrowing from Amber. I'm like, I didn't make that word up. But it's a huge part of my activism, my art, and my scholarship. And I think imagination requires a kind of curiosity that heals, right? And it helps us figure out how to eliminate the constraints that keep us from creating new worlds and new communities. So in your April 2020 article, The Pandemic is a Portal, it was published in the Financial Times. You talked about what India and the rest of the world should do next in light of this opportunity, right? That this moment is a historical moment because the pandemics of the past have forced humans to break with what they imagine their world to be, right? So you end the article by saying that we can choose to walk through the portal that is the pandemic, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, or we can walk through, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. In the 2 years since you wrote that article, right, and the pandemic is still very much here, even though people think it's gone, it's not. What can you say about how we've collectively moved through that pandemic portal? Are we dragging those carcasses?
Oh, we sure are.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, what has happened in the world is so, the concentration of wealth, the concentration of power, the ownership of speech. It's the saddest thing to see people who believe themselves to be free, but they are not free. None of us are free, And how just a handful of people now is deciding policy. I mean, what does Bill Gates know about education, about vaccination, about medicine? How much money do they have? And I mean, one of the books that was studied for the campus read was Capitalism: A Ghost Story, which was written a few years ago. But the foundations made from corporate profits that then privatize policymaking itself. If you look at what's going on in India now, you have a handful of corporations who, I mean, I won't get into the details, but it's so involved in caste because all of them belong to a particular trading caste. They own the wealth equivalent to, many times the GDP. And, they own the media, they own the cable, they own the digital world. They control everything, and people are being increasingly made helpless, even though they understand sometimes what's being done to them. So structurally, we are in a place where even if most of humanity doesn't want to drag those carcasses through, the people that control the world have certainly dragged those carcasses through the portal, and now we are facing a situation where you're once again seeing a kind of nuclear standoff over Ukraine. And absurdly, the piling up of nuclear weapons on both sides makes people have to watch this country being destroyed, this country that the United States considers an ally, but you can't do anything because a war could destroy the planet several times over.
Okay, so last question about your process in writing. So in addition to writing fiction and nonfiction, you've also written screenplays earlier in your career. In 1988, you won the National Film Award for Best Screenplay for your work titled In Which Annie Gives It Those Ones. Do you think you'll ever write for the screen again?
I somehow doubt it, because I'm something of a loner. And when you work on cinema, I have written the screenplay for 2 films, small films, lunatic fringe films, but still, you have to negotiate with producers and actors and so on. And I'm not really cut out for that. you know. So I don't know whether I will or not. All my friends are filmmakers, mostly documentary filmmakers, and it's a medium that I love. But I love the fact that my work I control before the money comes in. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as though publishers have a say in what I write or how I write, whereas if you make a film, the producers always do. And I think I'm too much of a maverick, in that sense.
So let's talk about The God of Small Things, your first novel. It is semi-autobiographical in that it takes place in your hometown. The family owns and operates a pickle factory, and I love how you say pickle. I like that word, but I like how you say it. It's cute. And your grandmother owned a pickle factory in real life. So can you talk about vulnerability that goes into writing from a personal narration?
Well, I mean, I don't know what, I think there's vulnerability in everything, whether it's personal, whether it's not, because I think the vulnerability of my political writing is even more frightening in some ways. But, so as I sort of mentioned, I grew up in this Syrian Christian community, which is a very actually entitled and elite community, very closed and therefore very hostile to me and my brother and my mother, because we broke the love laws, and so I used to just constantly be told nobody will marry you, and I'm like, you know what, I don't want to marry any of you, but thanks a lot for the offer, But so there is it's very interesting that when the book came out, there were many things that wound up people there. The book has, as many of you who read it know, it critiques the Communist Party, which was the first, democratically elected, if that's not an oxymoron, Communist Party in the world. And yet today, even today, you have this huge tension between the Marxists' inability to deal with the social engine that runs India, which is caste, and The God of Small Things deals with that. So one of the first things that happened was a group of 5 male lawyers. I have this serial event in my life. Every 5 or 6 years, a group of 5 male lawyers files a criminal case against me. So the first one was for corrupting public morality, The God of Small Things. So I suggested to my lawyer, can we not say that you should have at least said further corrupting public morality, because public morality couldn't have been pure before I came along. But anyway, this was a police case, and a criminal case, and the idea was that, this woman, my mother was also disliked in the community for another reason, which was the Syrian Christian inheritance law said that a woman can inherit 1/4 of the property or 5,000 rupees, which is like less than $100, whichever is less. And she had challenged that, and the law was changed to equal inheritance. So there was her and there was me, and here was a way of getting at us. So this case was filed, and I was supposed to appear in the court, and they had just really filed the last chapter, which is what they thought was corrupting public morality, because it's a description of lovemaking between Ammu and Velita. So then suddenly, in the middle of it all, the Booker Prize happened. So now there was a dilemma, like, we also want to claim this as ours, but, it's a little bit awkward. And, and I appeared in the court, you know, the lawyers were all ready to argue, and the judge came and he said, every time this case comes before me, I get chest pains. And it was kind of postponed and sort of generally ran out of steam until the next, you know, case was filed about something else that I had written and something else that I had written.
I love what you said about vulnerability, that everything, anytime you're expressing yourself is vulnerable, regardless of what you're writing or what you're creating and who it's for. Do you have any advice for our audience members who might be struggling to access vulnerability in their own writing or other modes of expression?
I'm terrible at giving advice, but I think, you know, one of the things is that, especially now, I mean, you know, I keep thinking of young people growing up who are so, you know, full of information. I don't think there's ever been a time in the history of the human race when human beings have had to process so much information. And people who have more information are more valued. I think that's so dangerous in some ways, because I remember growing up in the village, Aimanam, and there was no cinema, there were no shops, there was no restaurants, there was no cinema, there was nothing. There was just the river, there were trees, there were, you know, we literally made our own toys, learned to talk to the fish, figured out the worms, you know. So if I had any advice to give to people who want to write, I would say, please try and switch off for at least one day a week to begin with. Just, you don't need all this information. You don't need to know everything about everything. It's unnatural, it's not necessary. You need to know the earth, your neighbors, the birds, the dogs, whatever. But I think it's destroying us. It's not a moral judgment, it's just the volume of information that we are required to process. It's so hard to know even what your own thoughts are, what your own language is, what your own voice is, what your own feelings are. Are you sure they're your feelings, or are they, or did you just get it out of Facebook or Instagram, you know?
That's beautiful. I think we can all take that home with us, right? Step back. In The God of Small Things, the characters, Esther and Rahel, get into trouble because they're reading and writing backwards. And then even in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, right, that whole first chapter in the name, right, and having this meaning when it is spoken backwards. What inspires you to write about things just backwards?
When my mother and my father separated, I was about 2 or 3 years old, and my mother didn't have anywhere to go, and she came to this tiny little town called Ooty, and we used to live in this very small cottage, and it was a town where there were a lot of Christian missionaries. And there was this Australian missionary who was really wicked, you know, and she was my teacher, and she used to tell me that she could see Satan in my eyes. Maybe she was right. I mean, maybe she knew. But I, you know, remember that the first sentence that I ever wrote was, I hate Miss Mitten, and I think her knickers are torn. So she I mean, I was only 3 or 4 years old, and I don't know why she was like this with me. Anyway, then she went away to Australia, and I mean, I and my brother heard that she had been killed by a milk truck that was reversing. I mean, I know, but somehow this reversing thing got very associated with her and Satan and all of this.
I did not expect that for an answer. I'm sure the milk truck driver did not know that he would inspire an entire legacy of books and awards to follow by running over your least favorite teacher.
Yeah.
Wow. Throughout the God of Small Things,
Now these people who call me intellectual terrorist actually agree with Miss Mitten that they see Satan in my eyes.
All right. Throughout the God of Small Things, you capitalize the first letter of certain important emotions to give them an official name, or to the feeling and the expression. So, for example, on page 125, Rahel remembered the incident that made Lennon swim into focus as a capital real, capital P person for her and Esther. And then on page 139, you say an angry feeling rose in her, and then capital A, capital F far, capital M more, capital A angry, capital T then, capital N necessary, right? So a far more angry than necessary feeling. What does this use of convention signify for you?
I think, where one of the things that many of us who grew up in India and right there deal with is the fact that we live and swim in many languages. Like in Kerala, we were speaking Malayalam and English. I was born in Shillong, where they speak Khasi. I studied in Tamil Nadu, where they speak Tamil. Then I do Delhi, where it's Hindi. So especially in the God of Small Things, these children are negotiating this language in a way and turning things into concepts, because they have a very angular relationship with the language. And for me, in fact, the book of essays that came out last year called Azadi, the first essay is called in What Language Does Rain Fall Over Tormented Cities? And it's about the playing with language and how we actually, whatever language I write in, whether it's the ministry or the God of Small Things, it's really conceived in many languages, And I think that widens and deepens and makes quirky one's English too, because I remember when, the God of Small Things was shortlisted for the Booker, there was a sort of shadow TV jury of some very angry English people who were like, this is not English. And I'm like, okay.
So let's talk about social and political involvement. So in the 20 years that you've published the novels you've published, you've stood out as a public intellectual or an intellectual terrorist to some, and you're advocating for the rights of numerous groups of people and causes. Does that title, public intellectual, resonate with you, and were you also active in that work while growing up?
No, I don't know what is a private intellectual. I don't know about these words, and nor these words like causes or advocating causes, because I am not somebody who deals in causes. I am somebody who has a political understanding, who that cause is mine as much as anyone else's. If I'm talking about big dams, I'm not just advocating the cause of people who are being displaced, because there's much more than that, what a dam does. That river is mine too, and it's yours, So I think, even words like activist and causes, these sort of narrow down a much deeper, wider, and more dangerous politics, So I don't care what I'm called or named, it doesn't matter. I am what I write. That's it, I am
what I write. So this next question is totally inappropriate then, because we're saying that you're an advocate for certain causes. So instead, I'll rephrase it. What is the role of expression, written, screenplays, whatever, in activism, whether you are naming it that or not? What is the role of expression in bringing about change?
I think that's a very good and important question, because after all, one associates what is known today as activism with a kind of purpose or anger or protest. But as a woman who grew up in India, I can tell you that laughter is as dangerous to them as protest, you know. So for example, the film in which Annie gives it those one, it's all about the ability to laugh at yourself, at whoever, to, you know, I have a very, the film itself won one of my most favorite awards, which was called Best Film in Languages Other Than Those Specified in Schedule 8 of the Indian Constitution. And when we had, you know, when we had the national awards, which the President of India gives, and everybody, you know, sort of well-dressed and goes up to get, I mean, it also won the best screenplay. And when I went up, the minister said to me that from next year on, we'll have a dress code, because I wasn't appropriately dressed. And when I went down, the people, the press was, you know, they heard that there was some kind of argument on stage, and they thought the President of India had said something to me, and they said, "What did the President say?" And I said, "Didn't you hear? He said, 'Stay cool, babe.'" So, you know, like, I think and especially in India, it's so important for young women to know that there is the possibility of happiness. You don't have to only get married and have children and suffer and sacrifice. There are other ways. And so I think joy is also a very militant thing, not, you know, fake joy, but really enjoying your life and really being so, you know, living the full spectrum of it. This is, I mean, my mother and I left home when I was 17 because we were like two nuclear powers in the same space. But I just so admire the fact that she doesn't feel that she has to be nice or coy or sick. She just unleashes the full range of who she is, and, you know, she terrifies people, and she's like a little mafia don in that town, you know. And when I go back sometimes now as who I am, the people who were like, don't come to our house, don't come to our weddings, no one will marry you. Obviously now they're very nice to me. In my head I'm like, on your knees, you know.
Clutching my fake pearls, dear God. Okay. In Capitalism, A Ghost Story, you write about capitalism as this sort of insidious hidden entity that impacts every facet of life, but it's also something that is weaponized and it's highly visible, right? It's both and. And so when I'm in my work, I paint and I write about gender in the same kind of way. And I'm trying to illuminate sort of those hidden impacts, but also how it's weaponized to control, like you just said, women, right? Go have babies, be married, and suffer. In reading your work, my blood is boiling, right? In reading Capitalism, A Ghost Story, like I am feeling your rage and I am feeling that anger. But I also know that I happen to be a very empathetic person. So for people who are not empathetic, or for people who choose not to be empathetic, how do we reach them so that we can turn those narratives into tools for change?
Well, it depends on what we do and who we are, right? I mean, I can talk about it as a person who writes, and I think that is the secret of art, isn't it? That is that you do have to hone those tools. You know, there are friends of mine who are among the most extraordinary people I know, who were involved in the anti-dam movement in India. And before they became my friends, they you know, because God had come out, The God of Small Things, and, you know, some of the other essays, so they got in touch with me and said, some painters have donated paintings to us, and we're trying to use it to raise money, and will you come and inaugurate the show? So I said, no, I don't inaugurate things and all that. I'm not that person. When I come to the valley, I will write about it. But they said, oh, anyway, just will you come then? So I went, and I saw that these painters had just given them some mediocre work, and these guys also didn't know they'd hung some upside down. So later on, this friend who became a very close friend, he said, when we first met you, we thought you were a very cruel person. So I said, why? He said, you just came and looked at those paintings and laughed and left. So I said, look, Himanshu, there is no excuse for bad art. Like whatever your politics or whatever it is, there's no place for mediocrity. And so, to be persuasive as an artist, you have to be a good artist,
Okay, I have a nerdy question, because I'm a total in-the-closet nerd, so grace and compassion from the audience, please. So epistemology, right? The study of how we know what we know. Where does knowledge come from? Epistemic justice is a somewhat new area of scholarship that is asking us to question these sort of canons of knowledge, right? These very white, Western, privileged spaces, and instead think about other types of knowledge and where they come from, right? And I think too, higher ed is probably one of the most elitist structures, period, right? Full stop, right? We are self-proclaimed knowledge creators. It's our job to create knowledge, and we're really good at it. So for those who are sort of pushing for epistemic justice, they're asking people to reimagine what counts as knowledge. Is it somatic epistemologies, right? So knowledge in our bodies, experiential epistemology. So when we experience something like adversity, it creates a different kind of knowledge. Is it emotional epistemology? So in your work, I think that you are writing from a lot of epistemological departure points. Like there's so many points that create knowledge, whether it's the poetry, the rage, the vulnerability. What does it feel like to honor these various ways of knowing, and why is that important to your work?
Well, I think, perhaps, again, in India, it's a country where I often say we live in several centuries simultaneously, from the kind of digital world to medieval, injustice, or then other kinds of beautiful medieval things. You just move through these worlds in minutes sometimes. And to not see that is completely crazy. It's like, let me give you a beautiful example of it. In one of the essays, I think it's called Trickle-Down Revolution, where I was traveling in a state called Orissa. And one of the things that now puts a fear in my heart is whenever I see a flat-topped mountain, because a flat-topped mountain usually means that it's a bauxite mountain. And bauxite is one of the minerals that you use to make aluminum, which is, essential to the weapons industry. And so to the modern world, the bauxite is only of any value if it's taken out of the mountain, stored, traded, whatever. Whereas to local people, the bauxite is a porous rock which works as a water tank, which holds the rains from the monsoon, which waters the plains, which allows life to be, crops to grow, animals, creatures. So for them, the bauxite is only worth anything if it's in the mountain. To the other world, it's worth nothing unless it's out of the mountain. And so, to me, often the fundamental question, not just to capitalists, but also to communists or socialists or anybody, given the condition of the planet today, is can you leave the bauxite in the mountain?
Wow. Now we're going to get some questions from the audience. These are fielded during registration. So the first one is, can you describe your journey of writing The God of Small Things particularly how and why the idea for your book occurred, to writing it over the years and what you felt throughout that process.
Well, I started writing The God of Small Things after having written and worked on the sets of 2 feature films. And somehow I, having written screenplays, began to be, although I learned a lot from writing screenplays, especially dialogue and pace and all that, but I began to be dissatisfied with the idea that you just say, exterior day, river or something. And I wanted to describe this river, and I set out to write what I call a stubbornly visual but unfilmable book, with something perverse in the vividness of it, like what you just said, an angry feeling, a far more angry than necessary feeling. It's, she's wearing these little baby sunglasses and she's seeing everything red. And, it's visual, but it would not work out cinematically, So for me, and I started out really not knowing exactly what I was going to write, and it became such a game. How do you structure the story? Almost when you read it, you know the end right in the beginning, the part I read. You already know how it ends, and so look at it as a building, and you're looking through the various windows. You don't begin at the entrance and end at the exit when you're designing a building, So, and then language. There was a huge dissatisfaction in how does one convey the myriad languages in which one lives. You have to almost invent a language, And then when it came to the ministry, it was even more languages, and it was not a building but a city. And how is it structured? Where the city is a character, but the city is always also, can a novel be a city? But I could not have written The Ministry of Utmost Happiness if I hadn't written all the nonfiction that makes up my seditious heart, because it's such a unique place and time and era in which I live, and to understand it. I mean, India is a continent. We speak 28 languages. There are 3,000 dialects. There's, underneath every layer is another layer, and of course, we haven't even begun to speak about the violence and why I am called an intellectual terrorist. But it's always a game of language allows my blood to flow unblocked when I know I've got it. It's as private as that, in fiction or non-fiction, because until I know how can I express this thing that I'm thinking. There's a very good story, actually, of there was the World Water Forum at The Hague a few years ago, and I had been invited to go there because I was writing about water and dams, and I was like, no, I'm not going to this place, because I knew. Anyway, then I heard that there was whole delegations, and it was all about privatizing water. So I just arrived, and they put me on a panel of what they called writers. But they were all writers of water policy, private, Evian, and God knows whatever. So everyone was told, can you just introduce yourselves and say why you write about water? So the person next to me was an American, I forgot his name, Robert something, and he said, I write about water because I'm paid a great deal to write about water, and I just want to say that God gave us the rivers, but he didn't put in the delivery systems, and for this, we need private enterprise. So I said, well, my name is Arundhati, and I write about water because I'd be paid a great deal not to. But I just want to say that, you people, you call yourselves writers, But you're not writers, because writers spend a lifetime trying to close the gap between language and thought. And you spend a lifetime trying to devise a language that masks thought. So everything you say, you mean the opposite. Yeah?
This one comes from a SLU alumni. As a Gujarati American SLU alumni who grew up with Gandhi readings but now subscribe to communist political beliefs, after learning that Gandhi stifled anti-colonialist movements, was racist, sexist, and more, how do we finally remove him from being a pillar for the global community?
Well, one of the little books that is part of my seditious heart is a book called The Doctor and the Saint. And while it's a book about the debates between one of the most revered people in India today, who is known as Dr. Ambedkar, who was the leader of what were then called untouchables, and Gandhi. And Gandhi and he were antagonists, you know. And while I was researching Gandhi's attitudes to caste, I went back to South Africa, and I was so appalled, not only at what he himself wrote and did. In my piece, I only quote his writings. I'll just tell you a couple of things, but also the intellectual dishonesty that has, informed and created this myth, which is not to say that everything he did was terrible. There were things about him that were remarkable and wonderful, but we have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. And in South Africa, one of Gandhi's first political battles was to have a third entrance open to the Durban post office so that Africans and Indians don't share the same entrance. And then, of course, there was, he was part of he fought alongside the British against the Zulus, against the Boers. Anyway, I followed this from, his time in South Africa right until the time he was assassinated. It's a complicated story. But I have to say, I do wish that particularly the African American community here reads about what his views were on race, before just revering him, because a lot of falsehood surrounds him. And if you go to India, you do not find the portrait of Gandhi in poor people's homes. You will find the portrait of Dr. Ambedkar.
Does the heaviness of the subjects you address in your writing impact you personally?
See, I am my writing. If it didn't impact me, it wouldn't mean anything, would it? So I want it to impact me. I'm made up of that. So I'm not just some entertainer, and I write to understand things for myself, because I need to write things down to understand. So it's not that I just write to inform or educate readers. I write primarily for the sake of that piece of work.
One more question. How has COVID shaped your worldview and your politics?
I think it's too early to say, because it's still shaping us. It's put us, one of the things I fear deeply is how obedient it has made us. I know that I'm not saying this from this crazy right-wing American perspective, but from how deeply controlled the whole thing has become, I mean, the idea, I don't know, when we were all discussing which brand of vaccine we are getting, as if, like some shoe that you're buying or something. And anyway, but fundamentally, the most terrifying thing for me coming from India is that the second wave of COVID was, I think some of us have just blocked it out, what happened there. I know it happened in many places in the world, but in Delhi, the city I live in, people were literally dying in parking lots, on the pavement. There were cremations on the pavement. The graveyards ran out of space. In Banaras, the Ganga, the river was just thick with bodies. There were shallow graves. Millions of people died. The New York Times had a story about how the Indian government is refusing to really disclose honestly how many people died. And yet, somehow, because we live in this era where nobody can agree about a shared set of events, current or history or factual, you have people saying, oh, but if it hadn't been for the Prime Minister, it would have been worse, So we are somehow living in a very fevered space. Even here, there's a direct connection between COVID and politics or, ideology. Like, it's a divide. And then everybody is ushered into these spaces by the social media to believe what they feel comfortable believing in. And this is such a dangerous position in the world, which we know. I mean, the people who designed these social media platforms themselves say that the whole, all the algorithms are about ushering people into spaces from which they cannot talk to each other. And so we are heading towards a situation of incredible, explosive internal violence. I just want to say this, that in India, just in the last 10 days since I've left, we are witnessing such a horrifying scene, because the Indian Prime Minister Modi belongs to a fascist organization which was set up in 1925 called the RSS. The RSS believes that India should be declared a Hindu nation. It has 15 million members. It has its own militia. It's a long history since 1925. In 2025 will be 100 years. And as we speak, there are mobs of thousands of right-wing Hindu activists who enter Muslim areas with swords. The godmen dressed in saffron are calling for the mass rape of Muslim women, for their impregnation, for genocide, based on the fact that actually they are the victims of, the Muslims. So the government is going in and bulldozing Muslim areas where, it's like going to Mexico City or Brazil or somewhere and trying to look for legal construction. Everything is illegal, or so much of it is illegal, and you're just going and bulldozing whole areas. It's a very frightening situation there, and every form of dissent has been not just criminalized, but even the laws have now been changed to designate intellectuals as terrorists, that they can be put away, they can be jailed without trial for years together. Many of my very close personal friends, as we speak, are in jail. Intellectuals, poets, singers, lawyers.
I don't want to leave us there, because I think this night has been filled with so many different emotions. And you said it yourself, joy is an act of resistance. So I want to leave us on a joyful note, right? Because there will always be pain, and there will always be suffering, but there will also always be beauty and laughter and joy. So can you share with us just a story that kind of sings in the tune of joy for us to go home with?
The point is that those of us who are fighting because we have things that we love. We have things that we want to protect. We have music and poetry and fun, and there's not a day in India, in Delhi, when I just don't burst out laughing on the street. I'll tell you a story about when I was inside the forest, walking with the comrades, with all these people, just for weeks and weeks, all night, all day. I said I was in my own suite in the 1,000-star hotel because, the sky was so beautiful. And so one night, I saw one of these comrades, everyone was asleep, and except for the patrol and all that. And he was working on his, solar-powered computer. So I went to him and said, "What are you doing at this time of the night?" So he said, "Oh, I'm composing a denial." So I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "No, they keep making these weird allegations about us, and then we have to officially deny it. And if I had to publish all my our denials, there'd be like 10 volumes." So I said, "So what is the most ridiculous denial that you've ever issued?" So he told me in Hindi, he said, "Nahi bhai sahab, humne gaay ko hathode se nahi mara," which means, "No, brother, we did not hammer the cows to death." So I was like, what was that about? So he said, "Oh, the chief minister, when he was campaigning to become the chief minister, he promised that if he became chief minister, every indigenous person would have a cow, would get a cow in their house." So when he became chief minister, they kind of rounded up all these old cows, and they gave it to contractors to walk, days in the forest to go and deliver these cows. And these contractors would walk for 2 days and be like, "Come on, who's going to go?" So they would come and say, "Oh, these guerrillas, they hammered the cows to death, they killed them." And so they would be like, "Oh, already they're guerrillas, now they're killing the holy cow," and so many things got mixed up. So this clarification had to be issued that, "No, brother, we did not hammer the cows to death."
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Amber, Arundhati, and the audience. We will continue the conversation tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. Central Time at Cook Hall at the Chaffetz Business School. Let's see, we will send you a registration link for those who are not registered. Again, I'd like to thank our guests of honor, Arundhati Roy and Dr. Amber Johnson. You're both wonderful. Special thanks also to our outstanding performers, Samanvita Kasuri and Sebastian Boots. Thank you to Dr. Fred Pistello, Dr. Toby Bennis, and to our Walter J. Ong Von Cano Memorial recipient, Laura Hardin Marshall. And thanks to the whole Sheldon staff and the whole HEC media crew. We could not have done it without you. And just in a little while, just a little bit later this spring, we're going to let you know who our 2023 St. Louis Award recipient is. That person will knock your socks off, I guarantee it. So thank you all for being here. We'll see you next April or tomorrow. And I also want to let you know that Arundhati will be signing books in the back. Even if you have one, I think she's going to personalize it. So we'll meet you in the back.